When grief left Sarah Johnson, a widow at only 34, she thought her life was over. But one stormy night in Atlanta, she stumbled upon two fragile newborn twins, abandoned in the cold. Without hesitation, she scooped them into her arms, and in that moment, they became her purpose. For the past 20 years, Sarah poured every sacrifice, every prayer, and every ounce of strength into raising Grace and Gloria as her own. Just when peace seemed within reach, the twins' biological mother returned, demanding them back. What followed was a heartbreaking battle of love versus blood, sacrifice versus selfishness, and a courtroom decision that would change everything. This is not just a story about motherhood. It is a story about how true love is proven, not by giving birth, but by never letting go. This was how it all started. The morning light crept timidly through the curtains, but for Sarah Johnson, the day felt dark. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the photograph of her husband resting on a nightstand. It had been only 2 weeks since the car accident, yet the memory of that night replayed endlessly in her mind. The phone call, the frantic rush to the hospital, the doctor's words that shattered her world. At only 34 years old, Sarah had become a widow. The man she had built her dreams with was gone in a flash, leaving her alone in a silence that screamed louder than thunder. Their little home, once alive, with laughter and plans, now felt like a tomb of memories. The neighbors tried to comfort her with words like, "God knows best, and you're strong." But their voices seemed distant. The funeral had been filled with people, yet Sarah had never felt more alone. She stood beside the casket as if in a trance, numb to the prayers and hymns echoing around her. When they lowered his body into the ground, something inside her seemed to be buried too. Bills piled up on the table. The shop she and her husband had worked so hard to keep alive now looked like a burden rather than a blessing. The small piece of land he had inherited, once their dream for the future, mocked her with its emptiness. At night, she cried quietly into her pillow, asking God why her world had been ripped apart. Yet even in her grief, Sarah refused to let bitterness consume her. She kept going to church, dragging her weary body into the pews every Sunday, whispering prayers. She barely had the strength to finish. Her faith was fragile, but it was all she had left. In her moments of deepest sorrow, she felt a quiet voice in her heart. Your journey is not over. She could not understand what it meant. Not yet. All she knew was that life demanded she to keep moving, even if each step felt like walking barefoot across glass. She began to make painful decisions. She sold the house, the shop, and eventually, even the piece of land. Every sale felt like peeling away another layer of her past. Her neighbors watched with pity, some whispering that Sarah had lost everything, but deep within, a seed of strength was being planted, watered by tears she shed each night. She did not know it yet, but her story was about to take a turn. Destiny was waiting for her, not in the wealth she had lost, but in the lives she was about to find. That night, as she closed her eyes, Sarah believed her life had ended with her husband's death. She did not know that a new beginning was only a few steps away, waiting in the most unexpected of places. Late autumn rain stitched the sky into one long sheet of gray. The streets of Atlanta glistened with puddles that reflected broken neon signs, and the church bell behind Sarah fell quiet. As the evening service came to an end, she tucked her small Bible into her handbag and pulled her coat tight. The wind bit through the fabric and made her shiver, but she welcomed the sting. It felt like proof that she was still alive. She had taken the long route home on purpose, the one that wound behind the grocery store and past the alley where she sometimes cut through to save a few minutes. A hymn lingered at the edges of her mind. Not the words, only the ache that rose when she hummed to herself. The rain kept talking to the pavement. The city felt emptied of people and full of echoes. At first, she thought it was the tin rattle of a loose lid. Then she heard it again, faint and thin, and almost swallowed by the storm. A sound like a kitten, a whimper. Sarah stopped. The alley to her right was dim, cramped between a brick wall and a rust-stained dumpster. She hesitated. Her heart beat faster, not with fear but with a pull that felt both gentle and urgent. She stepped into the alley, shoes splashing through a shallow pool, the breath fogging the air. There it was, a soft cry, then another. She moved closer to the dumpster, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid, just enough to peer behind it. At the base of the metal frame, half hidden under a ragged, wet blanket, lay a bundle that was too still for comfort. Sarah crouched and eased the blanket back. Two tiny faces appeared, each the size of her palm, their lips quivering from the cold. The smaller twin let out a thin, desperate cry. The other blinked once, and then went quiet. Sarah's breath caught. She looked around the alley, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows and claim them, to say it was a mistake, to say anything at all. No one came. The rain kept falling. The smell of old fruit and wet cardboard rose from the trash. But all Sarah could see were the babies. Their cheeks were damp. Their fingers were curled tight against the air, as if trying to hold on to it. "It is all right," Sarah whispered, voice shaking. "I hear you. I see you." She shrugged off her coat, ignoring the cold that sliced through her dress, and wrapped the twins inside the warmest part of the lining. Her church scarf came next. She tucked it around their faces and held them against her chest. Heat moved from her body into theirs. She felt one of them stir against her heartbeat, a fragile flutter that steadied her more than any prayer had in weeks. "Hold on, little ones," she said, and her voice broke. "Hold on." She stood, careful and slow, and stepped back into the street. A passing car sent a spray of water over her legs, but she did not flinch. She pressed the babies closer, felt the rise and fall of their tiny chests, and began to walk. Each step was deliberate. Each step felt like a vow. At the corner, Mr. Henry from the barber shop hurried from his doorway, umbrella in hand. "Miss Sarah, you out in this weather, you need a ride." She shook her head and shifted the bundled coat so he could not see. "Thank you, Mr. Henry. I will be all right." "You sure that wind is sharp?" "I am sure." She tried to smile, and moved on, praying the babies would not cry out and draw attention. Not yet, not until she could get them warm. Her room sat behind Miss Loretta's house, a small space with a single heater and a kettle that hissed like a tired cat when it boiled. Sarah closed the door with her heel and slid the latch. She spread towels on the chair near the heater, then laid the babies down, just long enough to fetch a dry blanket from the trunk at the foot of her bed. They were so light, too light. Her hands shook as she wrapped them one by one. The smaller twin startled and let out a weak wail. The other opened her mouth without sound. "It is all right," Sarah said again. She rubbed their tiny backs in slow circles. "You are not alone." She filled the bowl with warm water, testing the temperature with her wrist. She dabbed their faces gently and whispered another prayer, the kind that does not ask for miracles, only breath and warmth and an hour more of life. She did not think about laws or questions or what tomorrow might demand. She thought about how cold they had been and how warm they were becoming. She thought about how her heart, empty for weeks, had just made room for two small lights. The wind rattled the window. Rain swept across the panes. The room took on the soft hush of a chapel at night. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed and drew the twins back into her arms. She rocked them, without music, only the rhythm of her breath and the whisper of her faith. The smaller one settled. The quieter one released the tiniest sigh, like a secret being told for the first time. Something unnamed rose in Sarah's chest. It was not grief, although grief was still there, like a shadow in the corner. It was not fear, although fear grazed the edge of her thoughts. It felt like the first ember in a fire that, I've been cold a long time. She looked down at the two faces, pressed against the blanket. A word came to her. Then another, soft and bright. She did not speak them yet. She simply held them close and let the words rest inside her. When the kettle settled and the heater clicked in the quiet, Sarah realized that the echo in her life had changed. It was no longer the sound of what had been taken. It was the sound of what had been given. She kissed the crown of each tiny head and closed her eyes. "You are safe," she whispered. "As long as I breathe, you are safe." Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, three hearts began to find the same rhythm. The morning after that storm felt different for Sarah. The air was still heavy with clouds, yet inside her small room, there was warmth. She had barely slept, spending most of the night rocking the twins, checking their breathing, and making sure they stayed wrapped in the blanket near the heater. Her body ached, but her heart was alert, alive in a way she had not felt since before her husband died. She rose slowly, her joints stiff, and boiled water to make porridge for herself. Before eating, she soaked a piece of bread in warm milk and pressed tiny drops against the lips of each baby. At first they resisted, but then one suckled weakly, followed by the other. Relief washed over her. They were stronger than they looked. As daylight grew, Sarah studied their faces more closely. The smaller one had a narrow forehead and eyes. The tape seemed to search even in sleep. The other had round cheeks and a tiny birthmark near her chin. Their breaths rose and fell unevenly, fragile yet steady. She felt a weight settle inside her, not the weight of burden, but of responsibility. Her neighbors soon noticed Miss Loretta. The landlady knocked on her door after hearing faint cries. Sarah hesitated before opening, then gently revealed the babies. "Mercy, child," Miss Loretta whispered, covering her mouth. "Where did you find them?" "In the alley by the store," Sarah said softly. "Last night they were left to die. And now what will you do?" Sarah looked down at the bundle in her arms. Her answer came without pause. "I will raise them as if they were mine." Miss Loretta sighed, torn between admiration and concern. "You already lost so much, Sarah. People will talk. Some will call it foolishness." "Let them talk," Sarah replied. "My husband is gone. My house is gone. But these little ones, they are here, and they need me." That evening, when the babies were finally asleep, Sarah sat by the window, the lamp casting a soft glow across her tired face. She whispered prayers, asking God to guide her, to give her strength, and to show her what to call them. She thought of her own pain, how life had stripped her bare, yet had given her these children. She thought of the grace that had carried her through her darkest days, and of the glory that might yet shine through their lives if she raised them well. Tears filled her eyes as she leaned over the twins. "You are Grace," she whispered to the smaller one, kissing her forehead. "And you, my sweet one with the round cheeks, you are Glory." The names felt right, as though they had been waiting. For this moment, Grace stirred slightly, her lips parting with a soft murmur. Glory stretched her tiny fingers and sighed. Sarah smiled, a real smile that pushed past her grief for the first time in months. The names were not just labels, they were promises, Grace and Glory, a reminder of what she had found in the ashes of loss. The word spread quickly in the neighborhood. Some admired Sarah, calling her strong, even saintly. Others shook their heads and whispered, "That woman has lost her mind. How will she feed them? She can hardly feed herself." But Sarah held her head high. Whenever doubt tried to creep in, she looked at the twins, felt a certainty she could not explain. She was not just surviving anymore. She had a purpose. That night, as she lay with the twins between her and the wall, she whispered into the darkness, "Grace and Glory, you are mine. I may not have given you life, but I will give you living. You will not be abandoned again. As long as I have breath, I will fight for you." Outside, the storm clouds began to break. revealing a patch of starlight. Inside, a new family was born. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Though it was a rhythm built on exhaustion, Grace and Glory grew stronger, their cries sharper, their tiny fists tighter. Sarah loved every sound, yet the weight of responsibility pressed on her like never before. Her savings, already thin from the funeral expenses, vanished quickly. Milk, diapers, doctor visits, each need demanded more than she had. Still, Sarah refused to complain. When her body trembled from hunger, she drank water and hummed softly so the girls would never sense her weakness. To survive, she took every job she could find. Her morning shift at the nursing home stretched her body, lifting patients and scrubbing rooms until her arms ached. Afterward, she rushed home to feed and bathe the twins, only to head back out again in the evenings. She scrubbed floors in office buildings. After hours, her knees raw from the mop water on weekends, she ironed clothes for neighbors, the hot steam rising into her tired eyes. Some nights she came home so late that her legs almost buckled as she walked through the door. Yet, when she heard Grace and Glory's soft whimpers, strength returned. She would scoop them into her arms and whisper, "I am here, my babies. Mama is here." The neighbors noticed her sacrifices. Some shook their heads with pity. "She will wear herself into the ground," they murmured. Others admired her courage. Children from nearby houses often peeked through the window, curious to see the twins who had been rescued from the alley. But there were cruel voices too. A woman at the market sneered once and said, "Those are not even your children. Why destroy yourself for them?" Sarah's reply was calm, but firm. Because love is not measured by blood, it is measured by sacrifice. Her faith carried her through the hardest nights when the girls caught fevers. Sarah stayed awake for hours, pressing cool cloths to their foreheads, whispering psalms through her tears. "Lord, do not take them. Please let me keep them. I have nothing else." When they recovered, she lifted them high in her arms and wept with relief. There were moments when she broke down in secret. She would lock herself in the bathroom for a few minutes, bury her face in a towel, and cry until her body shook. But when she stepped back into the room, she wiped her eyes and smiled at Grace and Glory. They never saw her despair. They only saw her strength. One late evening, after working 3 jobs in a row, Sarah collapsed on her bed, with the twins curled beside her, her arms wrapped around them automatically even in her sleep. The moonlight poured through the window, bathing them in silver. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah felt that her life had meaning again. It was not the life she had planned, but it was a life worth fighting for. Each struggle, each sacrifice, each sleepless night was not wasted. Grace and Glory were not just her responsibility. They were her reason to keep breathing. And though her body was weary, her spirit whispered with quiet certainty, "This love is worth everything." Years rolled on, and the neighborhood began to know Sarah Johnson by a new name. They no longer called her the widow on Maple Street. They called her Mama Sarah. The title came naturally. She had become more than just a mother. To Grace and Glory, she had become a symbol of quiet endurance. The woman who gave all she had, even when her hands were empty. Every morning, long before the sun stretched its arms across Atlanta, Sarah could be seen walking briskly to the nursing home, her bag slung over her shoulder. People admired her determination. She rarely complained, even when her shoes wore thin or her body leaned with fatigue. In the evenings, she returned with the same steady stride, carrying bags of second-hand clothes or a bundle of food she had bargained for at the market. Children in the neighborhood often ran to her gate shouting, "Mama Sarah!" They wanted to peek at the twins, who had grown from fragile infants into lively toddlers. Grace had quick eyes and a curious spirit, always pointing at everything, as if the world were a puzzle waiting to be solved. Glory was Gindler, often clutching Sarah's hand tightly and humming softly as they walked. When the girls laughed, their voices carried across the street, drawing smiles from even the grumpiest neighbors. People began to say those children would not be alive today if not for Mama Sarah. And in their words, Sarah found courage to continue. Still, life was never easy. The twins grew, and so did their needs. School fees became a constant weight. Sarah sewed extra clothes for them at night, using scraps of fabric when they asked for toys. She told them stories instead. Stories filled with courage and laughter that made their eyes shine brighter than any doll or train ever could. Her sacrifices did not go unnoticed. Mistress Bailey, the grocer, often slipped extra fruit into Sarah's basket without charge. Mr. Henry, the barber, offered to cut the girl's hair for free. The pastor called her an example of living faith during a Sunday sermon, making her cheeks flush with both pride and humility. But admiration was not the only voice. There were whispers too harsh and judgmental. She is wasting her life on children that are not hers. Some said, what will she have when they grow and leave her? Others accused her of trying to be holy, as if her love were a performance rather than a sacrifice. Sarah heard the whispers, but she never let them take root in her heart. When doubt tried to creep in, she looked at Grace and Glory's faces and remembered the night she found them in the rain. She knew she had chosen the harder road, but she also knew it was the right one. One evening, as she tucked the girls into bed, Glory looked up at her and asked in a soft voice, Mama, why do people call you Mama, Sarah? Sarah brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead and smiled. Because I am not only your mother, I am a mother to many, to anyone who has no one else. I try to give a little love. That is what it means to be Mama Sarah. The girls grinned, pride shining in their young eyes. That night, as Sarah lay awake, she realized that the name had become her crown. It was not given by birthright or wealth. It was given by sacrifice, by love, by the countless small acts that stitched her life together. She was Mama Sarah, and with that name came a strength she had never known before. Time, like a steady river, carried Grace and Glory from childhood into their teenage years. Sarah often marveled at how quickly the seasons had changed. The babies she once rocked through fevered nights were now tall, young girls, with books in their hands and dreams in their hearts. Grace was the bold one. She asked endless questions, sometimes leaving Sarah amused and sometimes exhausted. Mama, why is the sky blue, Mama? Why does the pastor always close his eyes when he prays? Mama, do you think we can ever travel outside Atlanta? Her curiosity was a flame that refused to dim. Glory was gentler, the calmer of the two. She loved to sit beside Sarah in the evenings, humming softly or reading stories aloud from school books. While Grace wanted to run and explore, Glory wanted to understand and remember together. They balanced each other like two halves of the same song. Sarah poured herself into raising them. She woke at dawn to prepare breakfast, even when her own stomach was empty. She worked double shifts to pay school fees, then sat with them at night to help with homework, despite her tired eyes struggling to follow the letters on the page. The girls noticed her sacrifices. They noticed the way she wore the same old dress until it frayed, just so they could each have a new pair of shoes. They noticed how she sometimes turned down dinner, pretending she was not hungry, so they could eat more. They noticed how she rubbed her hands, raw, scrubbing floors, yet still came home smiling, as if nothing hurt. One evening, Grace confronted her. Mama, you never buy anything for yourself. Why? Sarah smiled faintly. Because my treasure is not in what I wear or eat. My treasure is you two. The girls exchanged a glance, their eyes shining. Glory leaned against Sarah and whispered one day, Mama, we will repay you. Sarah shook her head. No, my darlings, you do not owe me anything. Love is not a debt, it is a gift. All I ask is that you live well, love God, and never forget to be kind." The neighborhood admired the way Sarah raised her daughters. Teachers often praised Grace and Glory for their discipline and respect. "Mama Sarah, you are raising them well," they would say. Children from other homes, drawn by laughter and warmth, came to sit on her porch and listen to her evening stories. Her home, though small, became a gathering place of light. But beneath the joy, Sarah carried quiet worries. She worried about the future, about college costs, about what might happen if her health failed. She prayed late at night, whispering into the silence, "Lord, I have carried them this far. Please carry us further." On their 16th birthday, Grace and Glory surprised her with a small gift. They had saved their lunch money for weeks to buy her a simple scarf. When she unwrapped it, her hands trembled. The fabric was soft, patterned with tiny flowers. "It is not much," Grace said nervously, "but we wanted you to have something just for you." Sarah held the scarf against her chest and wept, not because of its price, but because of the love it represented. She pulled them into her arms and whispered through tears, "You are the greatest gift I will ever receive." From that day on, Sarah's faith in the future grew stronger. She believed that no matter how heavy the road ahead, Grace and Glory would walk it with her, and that belief made every sacrifice worth it. The years swept by, faster than Sarah could hold on to. One day they were two little girls chasing each other, barefoot across the porch, and the next they were young women standing in their college uniforms, full of confidence and grace. Sarah often sat by the window watching them leave for class, with their bags slung across their shoulders. Her heart swelled with pride each morning. Grace had grown into a sharp-minded young woman with a fiery spirit. She excelled in debate and literature, always eager to challenge ideas and speak her mind. Glory, though softer in voice, was no less brilliant. Her gift lay in empathy and understanding, qualities that made her friends and teachers trust her deeply. Together, they embodied the hope Sarah had carried through her darkest years. On their 20th birthday, the girls insisted on celebrating. Sarah resisted at first. "You know I cannot afford parties," she said, trying to hide her worry. Grace grinned. "Mama, who said anything about a party? We just want a meal together, a real meal." So they gathered around the small wooden table in their modest home. The Glory had cooked rice and beans, and Grace had baked a small cake using a recipe she had learned from a friend. They lit 2 candles on top of the cake, and when Sarah asked why only 2, Grace explained with a laugh, "Because, Mama, today is our day, but every day is yours." As the candles flickered, Sarah looked at the young women seated before her. They were no longer the tiny infants she had found in the rain. They were strong, educated, and filled with promise. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You are my joy, my reward for every sacrifice." After dinner, the girls presented her with a letter inside. In their own handwriting, they had written promises. Grace had written, "Mama, one day I will be a lawyer. I will defend the helpless, just as you defended us when we had no voice." Glory's words read, "Mama, one day I will be a teacher. I will give hope to children, the way you gave hope to us." Sarah clutched the letter against her chest. Her heart beat wildly, overwhelmed by gratitude. She felt, for the first time in many years, that the weight she had carried was no longer hers alone. Her daughters were ready to carry their share. That night, as she lay awake, Sarah whispered prayers of thanks. She believed her life had finally reached a season of peace. She dreamed of quiet days, of watching her daughters flourish, of sitting on the porch in her old age, with nothing but contentment. But peace, she would soon learn, was only a pause. Life had another storm waiting, one that would test the bond between mother and daughters in ways she never imagined. Spring had come, painting Atlanta's streets with blossoms and fresh green leaves. The air carried the scent of renewal, And for Sarah, life finally seemed calm. She worked fewer hours at the nursing home, now that Grace and Glory were in college, and the girls often visited, filling the house with laughter. It was the kind of peace she had long prayed for. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah was in the kitchen folding laundry when she heard a knock at the door. She expected to see a neighbor or perhaps one of the girls' classmates. Instead, standing on her porch was a woman Sarah had never seen before. She was sharply dressed in a tailored suit, her hair sleek and polished, her eyes confident and unyielding. There was something unsettling about her presence, as though she carried a storm within her. She did not smile. "Are you Sarah Johnson?" the woman asked. Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, and you are?" The woman's chin lifted. "I am their mother." She pointed past Sarah toward Grace, and Glory's laughter echoing from the back room. For a moment, Sarah could not breathe. The words hung in the air like a blade. "Excuse me." "I am their mother," the woman repeated firmly. "I gave birth to them. I left them because I was young, poor, and scared. But I am ready now. I want them back." Sarah's knees weakened. Her mind flashed back to that rainy night. 2 decades earlier, the cries behind the dumpster, the ragged blanket, the fragile breaths of 2 newborns abandoned to the cold. She steadied herself on the doorframe. "You left them," Sarah said quietly. "In the dark, in the rain. You did not look back." The woman's lips tightened. "I did what I had to. But people change, circumstances change. And now, I have the means to give them the life they deserve. Better schools, better opportunities, better everything." Sarah's voice trembled, though her eyes held firm. "I have given them everything I had, every breath, every hour, every sacrifice. They are my daughters." The woman's gaze hardened. "You are not their real mother. Blood matters more than sacrifice." At that moment, Grace and Glory appeared in the hallway, their faces pale with confusion. "Mama, who is this?" Grace asked. The stranger turned to them, her expression softening. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I came back for you." The room froze. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she could hardly hear her own thoughts. She looked at her daughters, her lips trembling. "Grace, Glory, I have nothing more to say. The choice is yours. I will not hold you against your will, but remember, love is not only in blood. It is in sacrifice." The woman stepped forward, her voice coaxing. "Girls, do not waste your future in this tiny house. Come with me. I can give you everything she could not." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grace and Glory stared at the woman, then at Sarah, their hearts caught between 2 worlds. Sarah could not bear their silence. She turned away, retreating into her room, her steps heavy with sorrow. Tears filled her eyes. As she closed the door behind her alone, she whispered into the stillness, "Lord, I cannot fight this battle. Let them decide." In the living room, the stranger straightened her shoulders, convinced she had already won. But the twins sat frozen, torn between history and sacrifice, their young faces streaked with tears. The storm Sarah had long feared had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The atmosphere in the small living room was heavy, almost suffocating. Grace and Glory sat side by side on the couch, their hands clasped tightly together. The stranger who had declared herself their mother stood tall, her polished shoes tapping softly against the floor as she paced. From behind the closed door of her room, Sarah's silence felt louder than any words she could have spoken. For the first time in their lives, the twins felt the ground shift beneath them. Until that day, their world had been simple. They were Sarah's daughters. She had bathed them, fed them, sung them to sleep, and prayed over their fevers. Every story, every sacrifice, every tender embrace carried the same truth. Mama Sarah was their everything. Now another woman stood before them, claiming their roots, their history, and their very identity. Grace spoke first, her voice trembling. "If you really are our mother, why now?
Why not years ago when we were children? Why not when Mama Sarah had nothing but her hands and her tears to give us? The woman's jaw tightened. I was young and afraid, but I am ready now. I have built a life. I can give you more than she ever could. Glory's eyes filled with tears. More is not always better. She gave us love. She gave us herself. The stranger leaned closer, lowering her voice. Girls, you do not understand. Blood cannot be denied. She is not your real mother. I am. The words cut deep. Grace and Glory sat frozen, their hearts torn. They wanted to shout that Sarah was the only mother they had ever known, yet curiosity whispered questions in their minds. What if this woman was telling the truth? What if knowing her filled an empty space they did not realize existed? From her room, Sarah prayed quietly, tears wetting her cheeks. She had made her choice not to force them, not to chain them to her out of guilt. If they left, she would bear the pain in silence. Love to her had always meant freedom. The twins rose slowly, their legs unsteady. Grace's voice cracked as she said, "We need time. We cannot decide like this." The stranger smiled faintly, believing she had already planted enough doubt. "Take all the time you need, but know this, your lives will be brighter with me." She handed them a card with her number, written in gold ink before turning to leave. The door shut behind her, and silence filled the room once again. Grace and Glory clung to each other, their tears spilling freely. Their hearts were torn in two directions, one toward the woman who gave them life, and the other toward the woman who gave them living. When Sarah finally stepped out of her room, her eyes were swollen, but her voice was steady. "My daughters, I will not ask you to choose tonight. But remember, love is not proved in words, it is proved in sacrifice." The twins nodded, but inside their hearts churned with confusion. For the first time in 20 years, the foundation of their family felt uncertain. And as night fell, each of them lay awake, wondering which path their love would demand.
The house was unnaturally quiet. The next morning, Grace sat at the small wooden table with her head in her hands, while Glory stood by the window, staring out at the street, where children played freely, unburdened by choices far too heavy for their years. Sarah moved gently around the kitchen, her face calm, though her eyes revealed sleeplessness. She did not press them to speak. She simply set down bowls of porridge and said softly, "Eat while it is warm." The girls exchanged glances, but could not lift their spoons. Their hearts were too full. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "Mama, how do we know what is right? She gave us life. But you gave us everything else." Sarah sat opposite them, her tired hands folded on the table. "I cannot answer for you, my daughters. I only know this. Love is more than blood. Love is in sacrifice, in nights without sleep, in prayers whispered. When no one else is watching, you must choose not with your head, but with your heart." Tears blurred Glory's vision, she remembered. The nights Sarah had stayed awake, cooling her fever. She remembered how Sarah went without food so they could eat, how she cheered at their school plays, even when she came directly from scrubbing floors. She remembered how Sarah's arms had been their shelter when storms rattled the roof. Grace's voice trembled. "Mama, she gave us birth, but you gave us life." She reached across the table and took Sarah's rough, tired hands in her own. Glory turned from the window, her face streaked with tears. She knelt beside Sarah's chair, pressing her head into her lap. "We cannot walk away from the one who chose us when no one else would. You are our mother, forever." Sarah's breath caught. Her body shook as tears slipped down, her cheeks falling onto their hands. She wrapped her arms around them both, her voice breaking as she whispered, "My daughters, my precious daughters." At that moment, the front door opened. The woman had returned, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. She looked at the scene, her eyes narrowing. "So you have chosen." Grace and Glory rose together, their shoulders squared. Grace spoke first, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You gave us life, and for that we are grateful. But Mama Sarah gave us living. She is our mother." Glory added firmly, "We will not leave her if you want to know us. It will only be through her. But if your heart is to take us from her, then you are already a stranger." The woman's lips tightened. Rage flashed in her eyes, but she masked it with a cold smile. "You will regret this." She turned and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. Sarah trembled, afraid of what might come next. Yet her daughters stood tall beside her. That day, the bond between them was sealed, not by need, but by choice. Grace and Glory had chosen love over blood, sacrifice over comfort, and truth over convenience. But far from ending the storm, their decision only stirred a darker one in the silence. After the door slammed, Sarah knew their battle was not over. It had only just begun. The days after the confrontation were uneasy, though. The Grace and Glory had chosen Sarah, with words full of fire. Unspoken tension lingered in the air. Sarah tried to mask her worry, but her daughters noticed the way her hands sometimes shook when she poured tea, or how her eyes lingered too long on the locked door at night. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Word had spread that the twins' biological mother had returned, and not everyone kept their opinions to themselves. Some neighbors supported Sarah. Others muttered that the girls should be with their birth mother, that blood was thicker than sacrifice. Sarah ignored the gossip as best she could, but her heart knew trouble was still circling. One late evening, after finishing her night shift at the nursing home, Sarah walked home along the narrow road that curved past the old factory. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Her feet dragged with exhaustion, but she pressed on, clutching her handbag tightly against her chest. At first she thought she was alone. Then shadows stirred near the corner. 3 men stepped out of the darkness, their faces half hidden under hoodies. They spread across the road, blocking her path. Sarah's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Good evening," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. The tallest man smirked. "Old woman, you're walking too late. Dangerous time to be out alone." Sarah clutched her bag tighter. "Please let me pass. I have no quarrel with you." Another man stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Her heart dropped. She knew instantly what they meant. The first man's voice lowered to a hiss. "Leave the twins. They're not yours. You've stolen what's not yours to keep." Before she could respond, a blow landed against her ribs. The pain shot through her body. She stumbled, gasping, but tried to stand firm. Another strike came, this time to her shoulder, sending her to the ground. Kicks rained down their boots, merciless against her frail body. Sarah cried out, but her voice was drowned by their harsh whispers. "Walk away from the girls, old woman, or next time it'll be worse." Her vision blurred, the world spinning. She tried to shield herself with trembling arms, whispering prayers through the pain. Suddenly, shouts erupted from nearby houses. Doors swung open. Neighbors rushed into the street, brandishing sticks and flashlights. "Leave her alone," someone roared. The men cursed, retreating into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving Sarah crumpled on the dusty road. 2 women knelt beside her, their hands trembling as they tried to lift her. "Mama, Sarah, can you hear us?" Her lips moved faintly. "I am all right," she whispered, though blood trickled from a cut above her brow. They carried her gently back home, where Grace and Glory ran forward in panic, their cries filling the small house. "Mama, Mama, what happened?" Sarah tried to smile through her swollen face. "Do not cry, my daughters. They may bruise my body, but they cannot touch my spirit." Grace clenched her fists, her voice shaking with anger. "Who did this?" Sarah's silence told them everything. And when whispers later confirmed what she feared, that their biological mother had hired the men. Grace and Glory's sorrow hardened into fury. The attack had not broken Sarah. It had only revealed the depths of her enemies of cruelty. And now, the battle for their family was no longer just in the heart. It was moving into the light. where truth and justice would have to speak. 4 days after the attack, Sarah's body bore the marks of cruelty. Her ribs ached with every breath, her shoulder throbbed each time she tried to lift her arm, and her face was still swollen where a boot had struck her. Yet, even in her weakness, she forced herself to sit up in bed each morning, whispering prayers of thanks, and that she was alive. Grace and Glory refused to leave her side. They took turns pressing cool cloths against her bruises, spoon-feeding her porridge, and helping her shuffle slowly across the room when she needed to move. Their eyes, once filled with the brightness of youth, now burned with a fury that came from seeing their mother bleed for the femme. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the end of the week, everyone knew what had happened. The men who had attacked her were strangers, but the whispers pointed back to the same name, the biological mother. One afternoon, Mistress Bailey from the grocery store came by with a basket of fruit. She lowered her voice as she handed it to Glory. "Child, it is no secret anymore. People are saying she paid those men. She could not bear the shame of losing you, so she turned to wickedness." Glory's hands trembled as she placed the basket on the table. Sarah, hearing the words, bowed her head. She had prayed it was not true. Prayed the woman had more dignity than that. But deep down, she knew love did not send fists in the night. Only bitterness did. Grace could not contain her anger. "Mama, we cannot let her get away with this. She tried to take you from us. We must go to the police." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand, her voice calm despite the pain. "My child, revenge is not our way, but justice is different if the truth must come out. Let it come out the right way." And so, the matter was reported. The police began their investigation, interviewing neighbors who had seen the attackers flee, gathering fragments of evidence that pointed back to the woman who had claimed to be their mother. The community, once divided, rallied around Sarah. Men who had whispered doubts now stood guard outside her gate at night. Women brought meals, and children left flowers on her porch. The name Mama Sarah grew heavier with respect. She was no longer just a mother to Grace and Glory. She was a mother to them all, a living testimony of love, unbroken by violence. But the biological mother did not hide. Instead, she fought harder with lawyers at her side. She began spreading her own story, that Sarah had stolen the twins, that she had kept them away from their true bloodline. She painted herself as a victim of circumstance, a woman denied her rightful place by a poor widow who clung to what was not hers. The rumors spread, reaching even the church pews where Sarah once found solace. Some whispered in doubt, others in anger. And though Sarah tried to remain calm, the truth weighed heavily. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Sarah gathered Grace and Glory in the living room. Her voice was firm, though her body was frail. "My daughters, this battle is no longer fought in whispers or shadows. It will be fought in the open, in court there. You must be ready to speak the truth, not with anger, not with hatred, but with courage." Grace nodded, her jaw set. "We are ready, Mama. We will tell the world who you are to us." Glory clasped Sarah's hand, tears shining in her eyes. "They can call her our mother by blood, but in our hearts, you are the only mother we will ever know." Sarah wept silently, pressing their hands to her chest. The truth had begun to reveal itself. The world would soon see what love, sacrifice, and 20 years of motherhood really meant. The courthouse was packed. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of whispers. As people pressed close together on the wooden benches, some came because they knew Sarah personally, others because the story had spread across the neighborhood like wildfire. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when love and blood collided in the eyes of the law. Sarah entered slowly, leaning on Grace and Glory's arms. Her face still bore faint bruises, but her eyes were steady. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she had worn to church for years. She did not come to impress. She came with truth. On the other side of the room, the biological mother stood tall in a crisp suit, her hair flawless, her lawyers at her side. She looked at Sarah with disdain, then turned her gaze toward the twins, as if they were possessions to be reclaimed. The judge entered, and silence filled the room. After the formalities, the case began. The biological mother's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, this case is simple. My client is the rightful mother of Grace and Glory. She gave birth to them. She has the financial means, the stability, and the bloodline. This woman," he pointed towards Sarah, "is nothing more than a widow who clung to children who were never hers. She has no legal claim. It is time for these young women to return to their true parent." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded, while Grace and Glory squeezed her fingers tightly. Then, Sarah's representative, a local advocate who had volunteered to help her, stood. His words were not polished, like the lawyers, but they carried weight. "Your Honor, this case is not about blood. It is about sacrifice. For 20 years, Sarah Johnson raised these girls when no one else would. She worked day and night, fed them when she herself went hungry, prayed over them when they were sick, and guided them into the women you see here today. Yes, my opponent's client gave them birth, but she abandoned them. She left them in the cold. To die, Sarah gave them living. That is the truest form of motherhood." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The judge nodded solemnly, then turned toward the twins. His voice softened. "Grace, Glory, it seems this decision rests on you. Whom do you choose as your mother?" The room froze. Every eye shifted to the sisters. Grace rose first. Her knees trembled, but her voice carried strength. "Your Honor, motherhood is more than carrying a child in the womb. It is sacrifice. It is sleepless nights. It is scars. No one else sees that woman abandoned us when we were helpless. Mama Sarah picked us up from the dirt and gave us life. She is our mother." Glory stood beside her, her eyes shining with tears. "We are not objects to be claimed. We are daughters. And we choose Mama Sarah. We cast out the woman who left us, and we embrace the woman who raised us. She will always be our mother." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by sniffles from the crowd. Even the judge's eyes glistened. He cleared his throat and lifted his gavel. "The court recognizes the choice of Grace and Glory. Custody belongs to Sarah Johnson." Case closed. The gavel struck sharp and final. The biological mother's face twisted with fury. She stormed out, her heels clattering against the tile, her lawyers trailing behind. At the defense table, Sarah wept openly, her hands trembling. Grace and Glory threw their arms around her, burying their faces in her shoulders. The courtroom erupted into applause. Not for a legal victory, but for the triumph of love. And in that moment, Sarah's bruises, her scars, her sacrifices, all of it melted into joy. The courthouse emptied slowly, but the echo of Grace and Glory's words lingered long after the gavel had struck. Reporters whispered to one another, scribbling notes about the twins' testimony. Neighbors who had come out of loyalty embraced Sarah as she walked past, some even weeping openly. For Sarah, each step out of the courthouse felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shadows. She leaned on her daughters for support, her body still frail but her heart bursting with pride. Yet even in victory, her humility remained. She whispered again and again, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." Outside on the courthouse steps, the crowd pressed in. People wanted to hear more, to see the faces of a young woman who had chosen sacrifice over blood. Grace, standing tall, despite her trembling hands, turned to them. "We are grateful to our mother, who gave us life," she began, her voice steady, "but we are forever loyal to the mother who gave us living Mama. Sarah raised us with nothing but faith and love. She worked until her body broke, so we could have a future. We are who we are because of her. Applause rippled through the crowd. Some wiped tears as they listened. Glory stepped forward next her, softer voice carrying surprising power. We want the world to understand something. Children are not possessions. They are not objects to be claimed when convenient. A mother is not only the one who gives birth, but the one who stays when life is hard. We are not ashamed of our story. We are proud because our story proves that love is stronger than blood. Their words broke chains, not just in that crowd, but in the hearts of everyone listening. Women in the audience nodded fiercely, remembering their own sacrifices. Men lowered their eyes, humbled by the truth spoken so boldly. Even strangers, who had come merely out of curiosity, now stood in awe of the bond between these three souls. Sarah stood quietly beside them, her hands trembling, her eyes overflowing with tears. She had never asked her daughters to speak on her behalf, but hearing their voices, hearing them declare their truth before the world, healed wounds she had carried for decades. The biological mother, watching from a distance, felt the sting of rejection sharper than any knife. She had come expecting triumph, but left with humiliation. Her bitterness deepened, twisting into rage. But for Sarah, Grace, and Glory, that bitterness no longer mattered. Their voices had spoken, and the world had listened. As the crowd began to disperse, Grace whispered to her mother, "Mama, we told them who you are to us." Sarah cupped her daughters' faces, her voice breaking. "You did more than tell them. You told the truth, and the truth will never be silenced." The three embraced at the foot of the courthouse steps, their tears mingling with joy. Around them, the applause still echoed, a chorus celebrating not a legal battle, but the victory of love over abandonment, faith over despair, and sacrifice over selfishness. For the first time in many years, Sarah felt chains fall from her heart. Her daughters had spoken, and their voices had set them all free. The days that followed the trial were unlike any Sarah had ever known. The whispers that once judged her now carried admiration. Neighbors, who had doubted her years before, came to her small home with warm smiles and baskets of food, some apologizing for words they had once spoken in ignorance. Children on the street called out, "Mama Sarah," with more pride than ever, as if her victory belonged to them too. Inside the house, peace settled like a gentle dawn. Grace and Glory stayed close, making sure she never lifted anything heavy, cooking meals for her, and insisting she rest. "You have done enough," Mama Glory would say softly, taking the broom from her hands. "It is our turn." Sarah often sat in her chair by the window, watching them move around the house. Every time, her eyes fell on them. Her heart swelled with quiet joy. She thought of the rainy night when she had first heard their cries behind the dumpster. How small and fragile they had been. How uncertain her own life had felt. She thought of the long years of sacrifice, the hunger, the endless work, the bruises of both body and spirit. And then she thought of now, two strong young women who had chosen her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One evening, as the three of them sat together after dinner, Grace spoke with a trembling voice. "Mama, we know we cannot repay you for everything you have done. But we promise this, your sacrifices will never be in vain. We will carry your name and your love into everything we do." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, holding both their hands. "My daughters, I never raised you to owe me anything. I raised you to be women of strength, of faith, and of kindness. If you live with those values, then I am repaid 1,000 times over." Glory rested her head on Sarah's shoulder, whispering, "You are our forever mother." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she looked at the old scarf the twins had once given her on their 16th birthday. She wrapped it gently around her shoulders, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt complete, not because the battle had been won in court, but because love had triumphed over bitterness. Far away, the biological mother carried her humiliation in silence, her footsteps fading from their lives. She had lost, not because of laws or judgments, but because she could not understand that love was never about claiming, it was about giving. As for Sarah, she closed her eyes that night with a peaceful smile. The storm had passed. Grace and Glory's laughter filled the house once more, weaving warmth into the walls that had witnessed so many tears. In her final prayer before sleep, Sarah whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me grace and glory. They were never born from my womb, but they were born in my heart, and that is enough." And so it was. The woman who had once lost everything found everything again in two daughters who chose her freely. Their bond, sealed not by blood but by sacrifice, would remain unbroken forever.